Okay, nice to see you again, Bob. I'm Ruth Williams. I'm the Marine Conservation Manager for Cornwall Wildlife Trust and have been involved in the Southwest Marine Ecosystems for many years now, since its inception. And we're going to talk to you today about how to set up and what we're planning to do with the EASTME, so the East Coast Marine Ecosystems conference and reporting process. So, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I'm helping with this kind of EASTME pilot, but I'm currently the convener of the Southwest Marine Ecosystems program, and it's been the kind of work we've done on that and with other people like Roger Proudfoot that kind of got us to this particular point.
So let's start off with sort of the back at the beginning, where Roger's come from. So give us the context in terms of that Marine Natural Capital Ecosystem Assessment Programme. Where does this fit in?
Yeah, this context thing is really very important, and but it's an absolute total mouthful. So I'll read this, and it says the project is part of DEFRA's Marine Natural Capital Ecosystem Assessment Programme in relation to the land and sea interface work package, of which the mobilising marine social capital is one part, and EASTME is a part of that project. It's the East Coast and Marine Ecosystems project, hence the abbreviation, and we're doing a pilot project.
So yeah, tell us a little bit more about that pilot project. What were you intending to do?
Yeah, okay, well, the central idea behind EASTME is to basically use the Southwest Marine Ecosystems model, which we've covered in the other briefing, to use that model to see if we can actually apply this in another English region. And the region that's been chosen through the scoping process is the East Coast, from Flamborough Head to the South Suffolk border. We'll come on to the actual geography in a minute. Yeah.
So we did a bit of scoping previous to setting this up. What did that scoping project highlight?
So really at the start of this project, we worked with the natural capital ecosystem assessment team led by Roger Proudfoot and various of his colleagues. And we did a really intensive kind of scoping exercise which lasted a month. So the scoping report has now been produced and is available for people like Roger. And that was the first objective. But the second objective was to scope out how we would do this project in another English region. And I'll come on to talk about EASTME and the conference idea around that. And then the third objective, which we talked about and developed, was an objective to liaise with national policy teams who are interested in the marine environment, as well as representatives of the other marine natural capital projects who are doing work which there might be duplication and overlap, but in any event we wanted to have a liaison project, and this briefing has been produced as a part of that liaison project, which will be done over the summer.
Right. I think you mentioned it there, but that's crucial. This is about explaining and trying to tell people what we're trying to achieve with EASTME, but also making sure that it complements other work and other projects going on. I think there's an awful lot happening very rapidly at the moment under the NCEA umbrella, and we just want to avoid duplication, but make sure that it all marries up really nicely. Exactly. So why was the East region selected?
Okay, so during the scoping thing, we talked about the different regions and a regional sort of structure, but and to put it crudely, we came up with kind of a very kind of crude 6-region structure, which includes the South West and includes the East Coast. But in the end, we went for a structure based on the MMO planning regions, and there's a great deal of overlap then with the IFCA management boundaries too. And the East Coast from Flamborough to the South Suffolk border was chosen because it's the most unlike the Southwest. There's Flamborough. You've got the Flamborough Helgoland front, which effectively is the kind of limit of major oceanographic movement into the North Sea. The North Sea itself is obviously very coastal, in many of its features. Certainly less oceanic than the southwest. So, and the shores from Flamborough Head to Suffolk are predominantly sedimentary. So there's a very different sort of coastal geomorphology all the way down that coast, and a whole variety of things that kind of stem from that too.
So how do we intend the EASTME pilot to run?
So this wouldn't come any surprise to anyone who knows me, but it actually, at its simplest, I mean, well, Southwest Marine Ecosystems basically began through a series of conferences that was run on an annual basis. So it wasn't particularly difficult to spot that we could use a conference model to basically set up how this pilot might actually be run on the East Coast. Because working through how you set up a conference, when, who, why, how much, where, all of those kind of questions need to be answered when you're setting up, in this pilot, in fact, and the pilots conference. So what we've decided to do is to run a conference. We'll answer all those questions as we go along, but in answering those questions, we'll have to basically do a number of things, which we'll come on to talk about in a second or two.
Okay, so that's the region we chose. But what are the sort of real aims and objectives? What do we?
Okay, so if one goes back to the SWME model, there are some very clear, there's a very clear aim and a suite of objectives which relate to SWME. And we would envisage the EASTME pilot to have exactly the same aim and objectives for what it does. We in the briefing we basically set this out with the aim, just drawing from SWME really. The aim would be to kind of set up a communications program with a regional resonance, with the social capital side elements of that, and that can all be summarised in one sentence aim. Equally, the objectives, to basically cover communication, to basically spend quite a lot of time building up kind of an audience, to look at this kind of regional resonance idea, to look at the state of the seas reporting, to look at the ecology of the species, look at the management issues that relate to the region, and there's a whole suite of things. This is about outreach and education in general, which is kind of elevating the kind of community's awareness of what's going on as a whole. So you can have objectives for EASTME under all of those headings, and effectively the conference process and what we set in place will put that into practice.
Right. And obviously we're using SWME as the blueprint, but that doesn't mean to say that the EASTME steering group may come up with other objectives that fit that region more specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that'll unfold as we go through the stakeholder engagement plan.
So tell us a bit about who's going to be involved. How are we going to set this up, and who are we going to consult?
Yeah. This is probably the biggest part of setting this EASTME project up. It's all about the people, in effect. There are two significant parts which are important and related. The first is, in essence, to contact the major institutions who are likely to be involved in the region, who in effect, again in the SWME model, who are there and can provide continuity year on year in relation to kind of institutional support. CFAS, for example, is obviously based in the East, but you've got a number of universities, a number of colleges. Those are the sorts of organisations we'll be relying upon, the partnerships that Wildlife Trust, all of whom have major kind of regional groupings who basically provide the institutional support. So there's that arm of it. The second arm of it really relates to the let's call it the thematic topics, and you can envision that in a kind of series of kind of concentric ovals or circles, if you will, on the one hand, there's a community of interest in relation to each thematic topic, whether it be birds or cetaceans or seals or marine protected areas, a large group of people who have a general interest in those areas. And then within that, there's another group who essentially are working on those topics in reserves or marine protected areas. They're actually practitioners and experts in those topics. And from that group, what we're looking for is a group of 3 or 4 people who can form a team for that thematic topic to act as an editor and a speaker and a kind of a report writer and the social media lead for that team. Now, these thematic topic groups may already exist. And part of the process of the stakeholder engagement is to explore what exists already and build on what exists already. But actually, if it doesn't exist, then we'll basically put something in place that So when we get to the conference, we aren't intending to have a webinar sequence, but all the thematic groups will have actually met virtually, and also the institutional backers will also have met, and we'll be trying to get those groups to meet before we run the conference virtually, and then we'll have a conference, face-to-face conference, that actually brings all of this together, covering all of the thematic topics in pretty much the same way as we would for swimming.
Yeah. So should we just quickly go through some of those thematic topics? Obviously, we've got the ones that we use, but I think they'll be fairly standard.
Again, as a kind of we're drawing on the Southwest Marine Ecosystems model here, and our initial focus has been on those topics, and they're kind of, again, these are kind of important hooks for all sorts of people, but essentially they cover what we hope will be the totality of the kind of things affecting the coastal and marine environment. So there's oceanography and meteorology, including storms, plankton, seabed and seashore ecology, fish, seabirds, seals, and cetaceans. So that's the sort of natural system parts of this. Then on the management side, the management topics we tend to cover would be marine planning and licensing, marine protected areas, and this will also include coastal protected areas, which are huge on the East Coast, really important, fisheries, water quality, and plastic pollution, probably other aspects of marine litter as well at the moment. It seems quite likely also that we'll cover coastal flood and erosion risk as a kind of major thematic topic. Because of the sedimentary shores, it seems it would be negligent not to look at the impact on those shores or what's going on from kind of the marine context. So that begins to give you an idea of there'll be differences between what's covered in the EASTME and what's covered in the Southwest Marine Ecosystems program. But again, that's part of the reason for doing the pilot. And as I said before, what we found is these thematic topics map on to the UK marine strategy topic coverage very well indeed. So there's a kind of an added, there's an added strength in certain sense of being fairly systematic about the topics we cover in the way we're doing it.
Yeah. And what outputs are we hoping to get from this?
The output question is kind of really quite interesting. Our plan, and actually there's only one output that really counts in one sense, is that EASTME continues.
Yeah.
So the major success factor here is if EASTME continues into the future, then we will have actually succeeded. That would be a major output, and that's what we're aiming for. Effectively, there's a lot of money going into setting this up to kind of effectively encapsulate into probably 2 or 3 or 4 months, 14 years of development of swimming. But that investment is kind of pump priming. And it's pump priming in a number of respects. I mean, there'll be a conference, there'll be a report from the conference, there'll be a presentation from the conference, and those will be recorded, they'll be on the YouTube channel. But the communications infrastructure we're putting in place, a website, a YouTube channel, MailChimp, duplication, social media, that will actually, that will be there in future. So we're doing this with a mind to actually this continuing into the future. Okay, so the investment that's going in now is designed to encourage that model to actually run into the future and be a strength in the future. So that's the kind of major success outcome that we're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've touched on it before, and certainly in the SWME briefing. But this is pump priming funding to get it going. But the model that we've run for many 17 years in the Southwest is self-financing. It's a very sustainable model where everybody takes a voluntary role and we run it. Yeah.
That's really worth emphasising, Ruth, because the SWME model is sustainable in a financial sense. It's resilient simply because it's the costs are shared over many people who contribute a small amount, in effect, or their time mainly,
I was going to say,
and their institutional backing support. And by spreading that load, we know that we're going to have a SWME program next year and the year after and the year after that, simply because we don't have to find funds in order to do it. So there are not huge piles of money, there for the ongoing program, and we're quite happy to discuss that. On the face of it, that might appear a huge weakness, but actually it's a massive strength, because in a sense, the stuff that you set up, you know that you're putting in place that will run and run and run, which is actually incredibly useful to know.
Yeah, and it's not collating new stuff, it's collating the data that everybody is collating separately themselves. It's just combining it all together and getting those whole themes looked at, but essentially the cross topics as well, those interactions.
Yeah, and I think just perhaps to develop that, the webinars have an astonishing power. In fact, we've got a table in the SWME model report which actually has about 10 elements of the benefits of webinars and face-to-face meetings. Okay, webinars win 8-2 on webinars have got a lot of strength. There's focus, we can do a diversity of speakers, and it works really well. But where conferences win out absolutely, totally and completely over webinars, and I don't care which webinars or virtual meetings you've attended. The first of those is networking. Networking, at face-to-face meetings is astonishingly powerful. I mean, at the last SWME meeting, I talked to over 25 people in the space of a day. I mean, that was kind of decent conversations as well as nodding to people. So it's the networking part of this, the face-to-face meeting, that's kind of really critical. And that's why, again, we're organising a conference side of this. But the other side of this is the fact that these topics we're talking about don't exist in silos. Storms affect the coastal environment. The coastal environment on the East Coast is susceptible to erosion and flooding. So, the dynamics of the interactions between these topics that essentially are what we're trying to capture in the meeting too. And so it's the interaction between topics. Effectively at the conference, the plankton squad have to listen to the cetacean squad, the seal squad have to listen to the other groups of people, and the people who attend then come away with a kind of clearer view of the whole, the more holistic view of what's going on.
Yeah. So when are we anticipating that the EASTME pilot might begin? So what are the key dates that we need to?
Yeah. Okay. So currently we're waiting kind of for the financial go ahead on this, but we're aiming for a conference in the spring of 2024. Okay, and a lot of the work will be taking place in setting this up will be taking place in the winter with all these meetings and stakeholder engagement side of things. It will take place in a venue in the eastern side of the country. We don't know where yet. That's one of the things we'll have to talk through with the kind of steering group and the editorial groups to see, who can provide a kind of facility that will take 150, 200 people in some degree of comfort where we're not being, charged the earth. So that's the kind of nuts and bolts of a kind of basic plan, I suppose.
Right. And obviously, the final output of this is we want the EASTME to continue, but do you think it's possible, and what are our ideas for rolling this out? Will it work in other English areas, other English regions?
Yeah, in the scoping project we mentioned earlier on, we did describe, we did discuss the ambition of this in general, and the ambition of running one of these groups in each of the English regions. you know, that's a twinkle in our eyes, and we've got, you know, that in mind. Effectively, it's kind of, you know, marine. Well, it's State of the Seas recording on an annual basis in each of these regions. It's perfectly doable, you know. But the EASTME pilot will actually help, you know, illustrate whether, you know, how we go about doing that, you know, all the kind of practical elements of doing that.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly exciting. We know it works in the southwest. Be fantastic if we can get buy-in in the east and then see it going out nationally. That's, you know, that's the ultimate aim, isn't it? And I think it'd be incredibly valuable for everybody, from the citizen scientists right up to the managers and the decision makers.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to sum up? Or...
No, just one small thing. You know, we've got there's a paper briefing which covers this same sort of material we've just gone over just now. It's got, you know, links to our the Southwest Marine Ecosystems website. It's also got links to the YouTube channel, so you can see what these videos look like, obviously what the webinars look like and what they cover for each individual topic for the Southwest. I think that, you know, gives you a very kind of clear idea of the sorts of things we're engaged with.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Bob.
Thank you.
I'll sit there.
Good.
All right.
Cheerio.